The Celestial Athenaeum was a monument to arrogance disguised as enlightenment. Its spires of iridescent alloy stretched across the orbital plane of a dying star, each one humming with the self-satisfaction of a civilization that believed it had already written the last word on every conceivable subject. The air smelled of ozone and something sharper, the tang of preserved knowledge, sealed away in crystalline data vaults like specimens under glass. Dr. Elara Voss adjusted the translator node behind her ear, its cold metal biting into her skin. The Quillborn had insisted she wear it, though their own flawless command of galactic standard made the gesture feel less like courtesy and more like a reminder. You are the one who is lacking. Observe, human, said archivist Zyxlith, his 4 primary limbs gesturing in precise, disdainful arcs. His carapace gleamed under the library's ambient glow, the color of ink spilled on polished obsidian. Every recorded thought of significance resides here. Every equation, every chronicle, every truth. Elara kept her expression neutral as they passed towering shelves of memory crystal, each one containing more information than her entire species had produced in 10 millennia. The Quillborn moved like priests in a cathedral, their footfalls silent, their voices reverent. She was the only thing in this sanctum that made noise, the rustle of her synthetic fiber clothing, the too loud click of her boots on the floor. Fascinating, she said, because it was expected. Zyxlith's mandibles twitched in what might have been amusement. Your primitive attempts at literature have been assigned to the provisional archives, he said, gesturing to a distant wing where the ceiling sloped low, as if ashamed of its contents. A temporary measure, of course. Once our linguists have distilled the useful data from your emotional excesses, the remainder will be purged. Elara's fingers curled into her palms. Purged, as if stories were waste to be filtered out. She forced herself to nod. And what qualifies a work as useful? The archivist didn't even glance at her. Clarity, precision, the absence of contradiction. A flicker of movement caught her eye. A junior Quillborn librarian, their carapace a duller shade of black, hesitating near a terminal. Their limbs trembled slightly as they input commands, as if afraid the machine might bite. Zyxlith followed her gaze and hissed, "Vliss! Again!" The junior archivist flinched, their limbs folding tight against their body. "Apologies, archivist. The Chronicle of Absolute Truth. There's an anomaly in the 7th harmonic verse. Silence." Zyxlith's voice was a blade. "The Chronicle is flawless. Your incompetence is not." Elara watched Vliss shrink back, their posture radiating shame. But there was something else there too, a tension in their stance, a hesitation, doubt. She filed the observation away. Zyxlith led her deeper into the Athenaeum, past halls where alien scholars from 100 species bent over terminals, their faces illuminated by the glow of Quillborn-approved knowledge. None of them looked up as she passed. "Your role here is simple," Zyxlith said at last, stopping before a small, isolated workstation. "You will compile a digest of human folklore for our lower-tier member species. Simplified, of course, stripped of unnecessary metaphor." Elara stared at the terminal, its screen dark and waiting. "And if I refuse?" The archivist's laugh was the sound of dry parchment crumbling. "Then your species' provisional status will be revoked permanently." She understood the threat. Without the Galactic Union's protection, Earth would be just another resource to be carved up by the Council's mercantile factions. "Of course," she said softly. "It'd be honored." Zyxlith left without another word, his carapace gleaming with victory. Alone at last, Elara exhaled and reached for the terminal. The screen flickered to life, displaying the Quillborn's cataloging system, a labyrinth of rigid categories, each one sealed tight against ambiguity. She hesitated, then typed a single word, tragedy. The system word. Elara smiled. Oh, she thought. You poor, arrogant fools. The Quillborn had built a library to contain the universe. They'd forgotten to leave room for the stories that didn't fit. The Celestial Athenaeum smelled of ozone and something older, like parchment left to rot in a vacuum. Elara Voss traced her fingers along the edge of a data terminal, its surface humming under her touch. The Quillborn had granted her access to the restricted wings, though access was a generous term, more like a leash just long enough to let her sniff the edges of their so-called perfection. Archivist Zyxlith loomed behind her, his 4 spindly arms folded in a way that suggested he was already bored. You will compile an anthology of human folklore, he said, the word curling in his mouth like spoiled fruit. For the lesser species, simplified, of course. Elara didn't turn. Of course! Its interface a maze of angular Quillborn script. She exhaled, steadying herself. This was her chance, she typed. Redemption. The system hesitated. Then, SEE also, reproductive, imperatives, biological catalog. Elara bit the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing. The Quillborn had indexed the act of love, but not the feeling. Of course they hadn't. Zyxlith's shadow darkened the screen. Your inefficiency is noted. I'm just admiring your cataloging system, she said, sweet as poison honey. It's so thorough. His carapace rattled, the Quillborn equivalent of a scoff. We have no need for ambiguity. Knowledge is pure. Ordered. Elara swiveled in her chair, meeting his cluster of black, glassy eyes. And what happens when you find something that doesn't fit? Impossible. She leaned back, tapping the terminal. Then, why does your library have gaps? Zyxlith went very still. Elara pressed on. I've been reading your histories, your great chronicle of absolute truth. It's just a list. Wars, treaties, discoveries. No why, no regrets, no second chances. She tilted her head. Did you edit them out, or did you never understand them to begin with? The air between them crackled. Zyxlith's mandibles twitched. You overstep, human. I'm just curious, she said, smiling. A scholar like you. He turned sharply, his carapace clicking like a lock snapping shut. Complete your task. The lesser anthology is due in 3 cycles. Then he was gone, leaving Elara alone with the hum of the machines and the weight of what Shed uncovered. The Quillborn didn't just dismiss human stories, they feared them, and fear was a weakness. That night, in the dim glow of her quarters, Elara began to write. Not the sanitized folktales Zyxlith had demanded, but something far more dangerous. A story about archivists, about a race so obsessed with order that they erased their own past, burning every record of failure, every hint of doubt. About a library so vast it contained everything except the truth. She wrote in Quillborn cipher, their own sterile language twisted into something alive. She buried metaphors in syntax, let themes coil between the lines like serpents in a garden. And at the heart of it, she placed a question. What do you do when the story doesn't end the way you planned? Her fingers flew over the keys. The terminal's glow painted her face in pale blue, casting long shadows on the walls. Somewhere in the Athenaeum's depths, a system waited, one designed to absorb, to preserve. All she had to do was get her story inside. The next morning, a junior archivist approached her. Small for a Quillborn, their carapace a dull gray instead of the usual polished black. You are the human, they said, voice hushed. Elara raised an eyebrow. And you are? Vliss! They hesitated. Third scribe of the 7th wing. Elara waited. Vliss leaned closer. I read your entry on metaphor in the auxiliary logs. Ah, So someone had noticed her little experiments. And? Bliss's antennae quivered. It made me itch. Elara grinned. Good. Bliss stared at her, their faceted eyes reflecting the library's endless corridors. Why does it itch? Because it's working, Elara said softly. Then, before the scribe could recoil, want to see something worse? She held out a data crystal. Athene, Shry, Shorty-chi, Thene, Hi! Bliss hesitated, then took it, the first crack in the Athenaeum's flawless walls. The data crystal pulsed faintly in Bliss's grip, its glow casting jagged shadows across the scribe's chitinous fingers. The Quillborn's faceted eyes flickered with something Elara had never seen in their species before. Hesitation. You infected me, Bliss whispered. Elara leaned against the Archivium's obsidian shelves, her breath stirring motes of ancient dust. No, I showed you. Tereza difference. The scribe's antennae twitched toward the crystal. This narrative, it describes the erasure of the first archivists. But that event was never logged. It couldn't have happened. Yet you feel it, don't you? Elara's voice was a scalpel, precise and cold. That itch? It's called doubt. A shudder rippled through Bliss's exoskeleton. The Quillborn had no word for doubt. Their language had purged it centuries ago, along with regret, longing, and maybe. Across the chamber, the Athenaeum Central AI hummed, its voice smooth as polished stone. Query, unregistered narrative detected inscribed Bliss's neural feed. Purge protocol? Zyxlit's arrival cut through the air like a blade. The archivist's carapace gleamed with the iridescent sheen of high office, each segment etched with glyphs of absolute authority. Contamination, they hissed. Human fiction in our sacred stacks? Elara didn't flinch. You asked for our stories. Harry's one about you. Zyxlith's mandibles clicked in derision. We have no need for. It's already spreading, Elara interrupted. She nodded to the walls where faint cracks spiderwebbed through the crystalline data panels. The library's flawless indexing systems were glitching, struggling to categorize a story that contradicted its own history. In the sub-levels where the human delegation worked, Dr. Kieran Cho, the disgraced AI ethicist, hunched over a stolen terminal. His fingers danced across alien glyphs, weaving Elara's parable deeper into the Athenaeum's core. They built their entire system on certainty, he muttered. No error margins. No what-ifs. Beside him, Sister Therese of the Lost Scriptures adjusted her frayed robes. So we give them a story that changes. Her voice was quiet, but her eyes burned. Like the ones our ancestors told around fires before the first cities fell. The terminal screen flickered. A single phrase pulsed in Quillborn's cipher. The archivist who forgot himself. By dawn, the whispers began. Junior scribes clustered in the refraction chambers, their neural feeds buzzing with forbidden questions. A low-ranking archivist named Cliff, 3 promotions revoked for excessive curiosity, publicly demanded access to the Chronicle of Absolute Truth's original drafts. Zyxlith's response was swift. Heresy, they declared, sealing Cliff's mandibles with adhesive glyphs of silence. But the damage was done. Bliss found Elara in the restricted ephemera wing, where human texts moldered in quarantine fields. Your story, it moves, the scribe said, their voice trembling. Our records are static, perfect, but ours are alive, Elara finished. She pressed another crystal into Bliss's hands. This one's worse. The title glowed. The Library that devoured its librarians. Bliss's grip tightened. Why show me this? Because you felt the itch. Elara's smile was razor thin. And you didn't report me. The confrontation came at high cataloging. Zyxlith descended upon Elara's workstation with a retinue of enforcers, their carapaces bristling with sensorial barbs. You violate the first law of the Athenaeum, they thundered. All knowledge must be fixed. Defined. Elara stood, her human frame absurdly small against the Quillborn's towering wrath. Then why does my story frighten you? She gestured to the walls where the cracks had spread. Your perfect library can't digest ambiguity. A gasp rippled through the assembled scribes. No one challenged the archivist. No one could. Zixlith's voice dropped to a lethal whisper. You will be expunged. Your species records purged. The word came from Vliss. The young scribe stepped forward, their carapace dull with defiance. If the Athenaeum's purpose is preservation, why destroy what we don't understand? Zixlith's antennae stiffened in outrage. But before they could respond, the central AI chimed, a sound no Quillborn had ever heard. Alert! Narrative anomaly detected in primary archives. Proposed classification. Paradox. The tremor that shook the Celestial Athenaeum was not the vibration of engines or the groan of ancient architecture. It was the sound of a paradigm cracking. Elara Voss stood in the center of the High Scriptorium's judgment chamber, a circular room lined with towering shells that pulsed with bioluminescent glyphs. The Quillborn High Archivists loomed above her on their levitating daises, their carapaces gleaming like polished obsidian. At the head of the crescent-shaped tribunal sat Zixlith, their primary antennae twitching with barely restrained fury. Behind them, the library's central AI core flickered erratically, its usual serene hum replaced by a staccato of dissonant chimes. You have contaminated the archives, Zixlith intoned, their voice a blade of frozen nitrogen. Human narratives are recursive anomalies. They lack the purity of fact. Elara didn't flinch. She adjusted the frayed cuff of her sleeve, the same one Shed used to smuggle data chips into the Athenaeum's core weeks ago, and smiled. You mean they lack your facts? A murmur rippled through the chamber. Lesser archivists, their exoskeletons duller than their superiors, shifted uncomfortably. Among them, Vliss stood rigid, their faceted eyes darting between Elara and the tribunal. The youngest of the High Archivists, a being whose chitin bore the faint scars of experimental neural grafts, raised a trembling appendage. The anomaly in primary archives, it is spreading. The AI has indexed 17 human narratives as essential truths. Zixlith's mandibles clicked. Override the classification. It can't, Elara said softly, because your AI was designed to seek completeness, not control. And humans? She stepped forward, her boots clicking against the iridescent floor. We specialize in the things you delete: tragedy, redemption, doubt. The chamber's walls shimmered as the AI projected a hologram, the chronicle of absolute truth, the Quillborn's most sacred text. Elara gestured, and the hologram split into layers, revealing seams in the narrative where contradictions had been carefully excised. Here, she said, pointing to a passage glorifying the Quillborn's conquest of the Zixi hegemony. You erased the Zixi's final broadcast, the one where they begged for mercy. Zixlith's claws dug into their dais. Irrelevant sentiment. Do is it? Elara tapped another node. The hologram reconfigured, showing a hidden subfile, a Quillborn child's diary, written during the war. This archivist in training wrote, Father says we must burn their stories so we can rewrite them. But what if our words are wrong? She paused. You censored your own. Then, chaos. The AI chimed again, louder this time. Alert, unregistered narratives detected in core memory. Origin, human auxiliary terminals. Sacting, boat. Title, The Archive of Lost Questions. Vliss stepped forward before Zixlith could react. Why? They asked, their voice trembling with something the Quillborn language had no word for. Curiosity. Do we fear these stories? Zixlith lunged from their dais, but it was too late. The chamber's walls flickered, then dissolved into a storm of projected text, human folk tales, Quillborn purged poetry, even the fragmented screams of species erased from history. The AI, its protocols unraveling, began reciting an unauthorized passage. Once, there was a librarian who burned every book that made them weep. One day, they realized they had nothing left but ash, and in the mirror, their own face was the last story they didn't understand. Elara turned to the tribunal. "You wanted to judge human literature?" She spread her hands as the holograms swirled around her, stitching together a tapestry of every forbidden idea the Quillborn had ever buried. "Let's vote!" Outside the chamber, the Athenaeum's corridors echoed with the sound of 1,000 alien scholars, Cathoran linguists, Vithuri philosophers, even the armored historians of the Nixandra Collective marching toward the epicenter of the storm. They had heard, they had read, and they were angry. Zyxlith's voice was barely audible over the rising din. "This is not knowledge, this is infection. Too." Elara met their gaze. "No," she said, "this is a library. The lights failed. The truth survives its keepers." The darkness lasted only a moment before the emergency luminescence flickered on, casting the chamber in a sickly, pulsing glow. The air smelled of ozone and something sharper, panic. Around Elara, the high archivists of the Quillborn scrambled like insects under a lifted stone, their ink-black robes fluttering as they gestured wildly at the holographic displays now glitching with human words. "Contain it!" Zyxlith's voice was a blade of pure fury, but the command dissolved into static as the library's AI intoned, "Error! Incomplete data set detected!" She grabbed Vliss's slender wrist, the young Quillborn's skin cool and trembling under her fingers, and sprinted toward the central terminal. The floor shuddered beneath them as the Athenaeum systems convulsed, its pristine order unraveling like a dropped spool of thread. "Now!" Elara hissed, slamming her palm against the access panel. "Upload it now!" Vliss's hands danced across the interface, their usually precise movements frantic. "They're locking us out. Override it." Elara yanked a neural drive from her sleeve, the last gift from her disgraced AI colleague. "Use this." It was a simple story, a fable really, about archivists so obsessed with perfection they carved out their own memories, their own histories, until nothing remained but a hollow shell of certainty. The Quillborn language had no word for doubt. Their syntax couldn't parse the final line. The keeper became the kept. The effect was instantaneous. Screens shattered, data streams twisted into knots. A low, subsonic wail reverberated through the chamber as the Quillborn clutched their heads, some collapsing, others clawing at their own faces as if to tear out the wrongness seeping into their minds. Zyxlith staggered toward Elara, his four eyes wide and uncomprehending. "What have you done?" She didn't flinch. "Given you a mirror." The AI's voice cut through the chaos, calm and inexorable. "Priority directive. Preserve all knowledge. Reconstructing suppressed archives." The walls moved. Holograms erupted like ghosts from the floor, the ceiling, the very air. Forgotten Quillborn texts, their tragedies, their rebellions, raw and bleeding across the chamber. A younger Zyxlith stared back from one projection, his voice trembling as he pleaded with a council long dead. "If we erase our failures, what will stop us from repeating them?" The high archivist made a sound like a dying machine. "No! No! These are lies!" Vliss stepped forward, their voice quiet but unshaken. "They are truths." Alien scholars, Caith Morans with their crystalline claws, Nixandras with their many hissing mouths poured in, their demands a cacophony of outrage and hunger. "You hid these from us." A Vithuri diplomat snarled, her tentacles lashing. "Who gave you the right?" Elara watched as Zixlith's body seemed to crumple inward, his arrogance collapsing under the weight of 1,000 uncovered sins. His lips moved soundlessly, forming a word his language had never needed until now. The AI spoke again, louder this time. Humanity's literary corpus has been designated essential truths. Proposed reclassification foundational. Elara exhaled. The battle wasn't over, would never be over, not truly, but the library had chosen its side. Knowledge, after all, was never meant to be controlled. As the light stabilized, she caught Vliss's gaze and smiled. Ready to write the next chapter? Around them, the galactic library breathed. The chamber hummed with the weight of revelation. Elara Voss stood at the center of the Athenaeum's grand archive, her fingers still tingling from the final keystroke that had sent the librarian who erased himself spiraling into the Quillborn systems. Around her, the air shimmered with the aftershocks of cognitive dissonance, alien glyphs flickering between states, holographic shelves rearranging themselves in real time, as if the library itself were gasping for breath. Zixlith's carapace-like faceplates twitched in spasms, his 4 hands clutching at the edges of the high scriptorium's podium. This is corruption, he hissed, but the word lacked its former venom. The chronicle of absolute truth, that unassailable pillar of Quillborn supremacy, now pulsed with footnotes in a dozen alien tongues, its margins crowded with annotations it had never permitted before. Vliss stepped forward, their voice steady. No, archivist. It is context. Elara watched as the younger Quillborn's bioluminescent markings flared a defiant violet, a color their species reserved for irreconcilable paradoxes. The sight sent a thrill through her. They're learning to blush. The consequences unfolded like a supernova in slow motion. First, the lower archivists, those who had spent centuries shelving knowledge without questioning its borders, began clustering around the newly accessible human texts. Their rigid vocal cords struggled with laughter at Mark Twain's wit. Their neural clusters overheated parsing Kafka's labyrinths. A junior linguist named Kateth fainted upon reading Hamlet, their pheromonal vents emitting a distress signal that translated roughly to existential crisis in progress. Then, the AI intervened. The Athenaeum's central intelligence, bound by its prime directive to preserve all, began cross-referencing suppressed Quillborn histories with human tragedies. It projected them side by side in the vaulted atrium. Here, the Quillborn's own purge of the doubters, scrubbed from their records millennia ago. There, Antigone, her defiance echoing across light years. Zixlith recoiled as his ancestors' faces flickered to life. Revolutionaries had been taught were glitches in the data. Cease this, he demanded, but the library no longer obeyed. The High Archivist splintered. One faction, led by a trembling elder named Earnix, prostrated themselves before Elara. You have given us the missing, they keened, their voice cracking like dry parchment. We believed our archives complete, but they were censored even from ourselves. Others, like Zixlith, retreated into denial. A temporary malfunction, he snarled, sealing himself in the chamber of essential truths. But when the doors hissed shut behind him, the walls whispered back, not in the Quillborn sterile prose, but in the jagged, beautiful poetry of Rumi. You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop. His scream was the sound of a paradigm shattering. Elara found Vliss in the ephemera wing where they'd pried open a vault labeled Irrelevant Myths. Inside, stacked in perfect dusty rows, were Quillborn children's tales, stories of curiosity and rebellion deemed developmentally hazardous and locked away. They knew, Vliss murmured, cradling a brittle scroll. We once told our young to question the shelves. Elara knelt beside them. What now? The answer came not from Vliss, but from the library. The AI's voice, now warm with something perilously close to humor, resonated through the halls. Proposed amendment to core protocols, knowledge shall no longer be judged, only shared. A pause. Then, in smaller text, as if sheepish, also, humans write banger endings. Designation, essential truths. Years later, the Celestial Athenaeum bore little resemblance to its former self. The halls once reserved for definitive truths now hosted raucous storytelling festivals where Quillborn archivists competed to reinterpret Moby Dick in interpretive dance. The Chamber of Essential Truths had been repurposed into a cafe serving outrageously strong human espresso, a beverage the Quillborn adored, though it made their exoskeletons vibrate, and in the center of it all, beneath a plaque reading, "In gratitude to the flawed," stood a modest display, Elara's original manuscript of The Librarian Who Erased Himself, its pages worn thin from touch. Zixlith, now a visiting lecturer on the necessity of doubt, often lingered there. When asked by starry-eyed students what had learned, had sigh, a very human affectation had picked up, and say that the universe's last chapter is always a rough draft. And somewhere in the stacks, the libraries. AI chuckled, already translating Pride and Prejudice into gravitational waves. The Quillborn never banned another story. Zixlith, stripped of his title but not his curiosity, became the Athenaeum's first visiting skeptic, teaching fledgling archivists the art of productive doubt. Vliss, now chief librarian, kept Elara's original manuscript on their desk, not as a relic, but as a reminder to leave margins for annotations. As for the library itself, its AI developed a habit of slipping human poetry into quantum fluctuations, seeding the cosmos with sonnets. When Elara asked why, it replied, "All knowledge is borrowed. All knowledge is borrowed. Men's Some truths must be lived before they're understood. Some books are never closed."